Hi, this is Angie and welcome to DIY Homesteading at Missouri River Regional Library. We're back in my mom's kitchen for another at-home version. Today we're gonna make sauerkraut. Now, you could be like me and you're like, sauerkraut, really gross. Why would I wanna make sauerkraut? I have discovered a love of sauerkraut. Maybe not love, love may be a strong word. I like sauerkraut now, but that has not always been the case. I used to turn my nose up at it just like you are, but I tried homemade sauerkraut one time and that made all the difference. My cousins have this big St. Patrick's Day thing where they make corned beef and cabbage and all that, and then the day after they make Reubens. And the first time I was up there, they were like, we're gonna make Reubens, and I was like, okay, sure. I'll just take half a sandwich. And they made the half a sandwich and I ate it to be polite, and I was like, huh, that's not too bad. Maybe I'll try the other half of my sandwich. And now I'm like everyone else, and I just get my 2 sandwiches of Reubens with the homemade sauerkraut on it, and I love it. I'll even eat the non-homemade stuff, though I'm a little pickier about the stuff out of a jar. I like the glass stuff, the stuff that comes in a glass jar. So I have made my own homemade sauerkraut, and you will not believe how easy this is to make. I mean, seriously, it really has 2 ingredients. It has cabbage and salt. That's it. Your third ingredient is time. You want to have time to do all of this. It does take a little bit. You can't just cut up your cabbage and then have sauerkraut, but it's pretty easy. So you can take your cabbage. You can grow your own cabbage, or you can buy store-bought cabbage. You do want to remove the leaves off of the cabbage. These outside leaves they're not the nicest. They usually have brown spots, and they could be a little dirtier. So take those off until you get to the nice tender inside leaves. But do not throw these leaves away. We are going to use those later. And then if you've never chopped up a cabbage, it's not that hard. You want to take the core off. This is the part that's attached to the plant. So we're going to take that off, slice it off, set it aside. Then we're going to quarter this. So we're going to chop it into quarters. And you do want a fairly big knife, as you can see I'm using, because you want to get all the way through it. And then once you get in here, the core, if you can see, comes up a little bit. So you want to get rid of this hard core part. And you can do that by just kind of cutting off a corner and getting rid of it like that. Now, if you are old school, traditional sauerkraut maker, this one actually doesn't have a core. I cut it so that the core was all on that side. You would shred this by hand. I am not a traditional, old school, hardcore sauerkraut maker. I'm gonna use our food processor because it takes so little time and it makes wonderful, nice shredded cabbage. We use this for making cabbage slaw as well and shredding a lot of other stuff. But I'm gonna shred this all up. You use the shred setting on there. If you didn't want to do that, you can shred these with a mandolin. You can shred it by hand with a knife, but you do want some finely cut cabbage. So let's get to shredding. Okay, we're back and we have a full shredded bowl of cabbage. This is 1 head of cabbage. Shredded in the food processor. Make sure you use the slice setting so that you have, nice sliced cabbage. If you use the shred setting, you will just have a much finer cabbage. So the recipe I'm using says to do 1.5 tablespoons of salt per head of cabbage. Now, I have looked at a lot of recipes online on how to do sauerkraut in a jar, and almost every single one of them have different salt ratios. So I think it's a little subjective. I think you just want to salt your cabbage. So if you have a really big head of cabbage, maybe you need a little bit more salt. If your head of cabbage is slightly smaller, then maybe you need a little less salt. The salt breaks down the sugars in the cabbage. So that's what the fermentation process is. So how do we do that? Do we just shove this in a jar? Nope. We are going to massage it. We're going to massage the cabbage with the salt so we can release those sugars and start the fermentation process. This also starts the brining liquid. So as we're massaging the cabbage, it is going to start releasing some liquid, and that is what is going to be in your jar to help ferment the cabbage into sauerkraut. Now, I've also noticed in all the recipes that I've looked at online that they will do this different. So some recipes say to massage your cabbage for 3 to 5 minutes, then put them in a jar, and then you fill the jar with some salt water. So you would make your own brine to cover the cabbage. Other ones I looked at said to massage your cabbage for up to 20 minutes so that the liquid in your jar is all from the cabbage you've made, and you don't add any extra liquid. So I think that's subjective as well. You can do whichever recipe you like. This method that I did about a week ago, a little over a week ago, I guess it was a week and a half ago, I massaged it for about 20 minutes till I had enough liquid to cover the sauerkraut in my jar. And it was kind of subjective on how long that took. I don't think I timed it, so I don't know that it was exactly 20 minutes. But at one point I thought, oh yeah, there's a lot of liquid in my bowl. So I put it in the jar, but there wasn't enough liquid to cover all the sauerkraut or all the cabbage. So I put it back in my bowl and massaged some more until it was nice and liquidy. So while I am practicing my massage techniques here on this cabbage, let's talk about sauerkraut. So you may think sauerkraut is German, and the word sauerkraut is German, and it is the national dish of Germany. Sauerkraut comes from fermented cabbage, or can't remember, something cabbage, but it did not originate in Germany. In fact, sauerkraut was first made in China about the same time the Great Wall was being built, and they fermented their cabbage with rice wine vinegar. So they called it Sonke, and it came to Europe with the Tartars, and then became a popular dish in Central and Eastern Asia, or Central and Eastern Europe. So there's a couple of little anecdotes about sauerkraut that I found interesting. Captain James Cook, who was a famous explorer, always made sure that he had sauerkraut on board before he set off on his expeditions, because he thought eating sauerkraut kept his crew from having scurvy. So I guess sauerkraut was much easier to get a hold of than oranges or lemons and limes to prevent scurvy. And then during the Civil War here in America, Dr. John J. Terrell, who was a doctor at a prisoner of war camp, he reduced the death rate of prisoners in his camp by feeding them raw sauerkraut. So, okay. It's also considered a folk remedy for canker sores. So if you ever get canker sores in your mouth, supposedly, if you rinse your mouth out with the brine from sauerkraut, and then you take some sauerkraut and pack it on your sore, it takes care of your canker sore. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they say. Okay, so it's also a really good source of nutrition. I wasn't aware of how healthy sauerkraut actually is. Now it does have sodium in it because you use salt for the fermentation process, but it is a very high source of vitamin C and K because of the cabbage. But the fermentation of the cabbage into sauerkraut actually makes sauerkraut more nutritious than cabbage. That's something to think about, isn't it? It's also high in calcium, magnesium. It's a good source of dietary fiber, folate, iron, potassium, copper, and manganese. That's what I learned. It's a probiotic, So, you know, like yogurt and all that stuff that is good for your gut biome, well, sauerkraut is as well. It will keep, so this is one of the reasons it became popular in Eastern Europe, because it'll keep during the winter. So once you have a jar of sauerkraut, if you store this in a nice cool spot, it will keep for months. If you refrigerate it, which of course back when it was first became in use, there was no refrigeration, but if you refrigerate it today, it will last for months and months. So back in the several centuries ago, you would just put it in your cellar or something and keep it nice and cool, and you could have a good source of vegetables all winter long. So you probably here eat sauerkraut maybe on a bratwurst or a hot dog, maybe on some pork, on a Reuben sandwich. But throughout the world, lots of people eat sauerkraut with different things. Predominantly with pork. It is a good combination with pork. So a lot of people eat it with pork or sausages. You can eat it with potatoes or dumplings, with beans. In my family, even though I didn't like it and didn't eat it, traditionally we would have it on New Year's Day. My great-grandmother, who was German, would have sauerkraut, and we would have it with white beans, I believe is what my mom told me. And of course, I was a picky kid and didn't try it then. I might have liked it, I don't know. But now you can eat it with anything. You could just have a side of sauerkraut if you wanted. It's completely up to you. There are variations throughout the world. Probably the most recognizable is kimchi from Korea. It is a kind of a spicier pickled cabbage, and it becomes red because of all the chilies and spices on it. I have never made kimchi. I've had it, but I've never made it. I have a couple of recipes that I might try, but it takes a lot of effort. So some variations though on just plain cabbage with salt. Some people add carrots, which I thought was interesting because that's almost like a pickled coleslaw if you have cabbage and carrots. Caraway seeds is very common. You can put caraway seeds in it if you like that. Shredded apples, cranberries, and then there's some other traditions in Europe where if you cook it with sweet peppers or onions or something like that too. But I am just making traditional cabbage sauerkraut. So it's just the cabbage and the salt. Now, what do you do once you get this all massaged and brined up? If you wanted to go the old school traditional method, if you have a crock, this is how it used to be made. You would have a big crock, you would stick your cabbage and your salt into your crock, put a plate on it or a cloth or something like that, stick it in your cellar for several months and forget about it. And then you would have sauerkraut all winter. I don't have a crock. I have jars, and so we're making small batch sauerkraut. And I actually bought these little fermenting kit things to use. So this is just a wide mouth jar lid that goes over your jar, and it has a gasket, and so your air bubbles can come up through here, and we'll put water in this canister, and then there's holes in the lid so that gas can escape. If you don't have this was not very expensive. You get 4 of them for your jars. If you don't have that, you can use a all right. Dexter has very strong opinions on sauerkraut. That is one of the drawbacks of doing this at home. You have to deal with interruptions like that. Everybody, my dog Dexter, he's very loud. where was it? Okay, so if you don't have a fermentation kit, you can use like cheesecloth or something like that, put it over your jar, but you don't want to seal your jar because you want the gas bubbles to escape. That's what fermentation is. It breaks down the sugars and allows the gas to escape so that we can have fermented cabbage. All right, my hand is starting to cramp, and I think this is pretty good. So we're going to put this, and I've made a mess over here. We're gonna put it in jars. And I might actually have to make some brine liquid. I have gotten this pretty briny, but I'm not sure there's enough to cover the cabbage. So we could make some liquid, but all you really do, you want to stick your cabbage in your jar. And like I said, this is a head of cabbage. This was a half a head, and it made half a jar. So I'm assuming a full head is going to make pretty close to a full jar of cabbage. And we're gonna just pack it in here. And you know, if you don't want it, actually it's gonna make more than one jar. So if I didn't want to make this super full, I could pack it down and leave some head space in my jar, and then just start on a second jar and put this in here. And I'm definitely gonna have to make some liquid. So some salt water to add to this. I will divide up my brine that I have that hasn't been scooped up with the cabbage into my jars. But you do want to pack it down. Then, okay, so it's kind of a messy process. You will of course clean up your jars a little bit. Don't be super messy like I am. But the reason we saved our leaves is because you want something on top of your shredded cabbage to make sure that it all stays underneath the liquid. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take these leaves and we're going to stick them on top of our shredded cabbage and press down. So this actually does have enough liquid in it. You can see there's actually liquid on top of my cabbage here. So we're gonna put a couple of leaves of the cabbage in there. You can do other things too. You could put a rock in a baggie and put it on there. It's you could put if you have a jelly jar that will fit down into your jar, some kind of weight. You just want something so that your shredded cabbage stays under the liquid, because you don't, if it doesn't, then it's probably going to turn brown and not be very good. Now your leaves on top here will probably turn a little bit brown, but that's okay because you're not going to keep those. We're going to dispose of them when the process is done. So then if I have that all covered in liquid, I'm going to put my jar lid on here, and I will tighten this because I have the air can escape through up here. And then I'm going to pour some liquid into just some plain water into the top of this, and I'm going to let this sit in a cool spot for probably a week to 10 days. This one was 9 days, I believe, and it is pretty tasty actually. It probably is a milder sauerkraut. Let's see. It's but you can tell that it is now yellow. It's, you know, it's lost a lot of its green color because it's fermented. And if we try it, it's sour, but not overly sour. Still nice and crunchy, and will be delicious with pork or hot dog or something like that. So that we are storing in the refrigerator, and it should be good in the refrigerator for months. If you wanted to store it in like a cellar or something, if you have a nice cool cellar, you could do that with your other canned goods. Our cellar for some reason is really hot this summer, so we're not storing it down there. But that is how you make sauerkraut. So I'm just gonna let this sit. I'm gonna shred up this other cabbage and do another jar. I promised my grandma I'd share some with her, so we need some extras. But we'll let this sit for a week, 10 days. You can check it. And it's kind of neat because as it goes, you'll see there's little bubbles in your water as the gas is escaping. So it's kind of a fun process. It's a process you can do with kids because they could definitely get in here and get messy and massage it and make them have sore hands instead of you for sure. But if you have any questions about making sauerkraut, please let me know. Otherwise, enjoy it and try something new. This has been Angie at DIY Homesteading with Missouri River Regional Library. Okay, so I'm back for just a quick little update. My 2 heads of cabbage made 3 jars of sauerkraut. They are now going to sit for a little while, and you can see that the process is already starting to work. You can see the little bubbles in my fermentation jar here, so that means the gas is escaping. And our sauerkraut is starting to become, or our cabbage is starting to become sauerkraut. So you can see the jars have liquid up over top the shredded cabbage, and I have my cabbage leaves on top there to keep them down underneath the liquid. I will probably test them here a couple times over the next week to make sure that they are still covered, but so far so good, and in a week and a half we'll have some fresh sauerkraut.